right, so I am Dr. Koontz, Alicia Koontz, and this is my student Ahlad Neti, who just recently graduated. So I want to credit him for the work that I'm going to be presenting today, and also this title, because, okay, thanks. Am I on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, excellent. All right. Okay, so the motivation for this project not just comes from what the literature tells us about how much back pain and neck pain there are in the population that use wheelchairs, but I was actually at the National Veterans Wheelchair Games. So this is an event that our lab goes to every year to do some research with the veteran athletes there. And I was watching the slalom event. Has anybody seen the slalom? It's basically a timed event. You probably saw the course here at the Senior Symposium and Expo. It's a lot of different obstacles. Everything that you can think of is on it. It's pretty extreme. And I'm standing there next to this guy, and he is like going wild over this wheelchair user who's traversing the course. And after he finished, I looked over him. I guess you know him? And he's like, yeah, it's my dad. I said, well, your dad's got some really cool wheels on his wheelchair. He's like, those wheels saved my dad's life. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, my dad has spinal stenosis. It was really bad. And he wouldn't leave the house because when he left the house in his wheelchair, he had so much pain going over obstacles, I guess he would encounter. And he just decided, became like, basically, I'm not going out of the home, and got depressed and all this stuff. And then they saw some ad through some magazine around this product called Soft Wheels. So it's a in-wheel suspension, or it's a real wheel that has built-in suspension in it. And they were able to get that for him, ironically, not through the VA, which provides a lot of equipment for veterans, but through some other agency that does work with veterans. So they got a hold of these wheels and they got him for him, and he put them on, and he said it was amazing, like reduced all this pain that he had in his body. So I was like, I need to study this. So I wrote a grant to do that. And that kind of starts the story off, that we were looking at seeing if this in-wheel suspension could potentially reduce pain in other people as well. As you're probably familiar, there's been a lot of innovations around in-frame suspension components. You can have components that are, just within the frame itself, so little shocks and different kinds of shock absorbing components. Also in the casters, so you have frog legs was here. So that's another example. So in-wheel suspension is a little bit newer technology. One of the issues with some of these existing suspension systems is that they, first off, they show pretty mixed results. Potentially, a lot of people point to the fact that they're just kind of, they're aligned in a certain direction. But when you encounter, vibrations and shocks, they typically come at different directions at you. So the idea behind this technology is that it provides a little bit more of a 360-degree approach to dealing with the vibrations and shocks. And what's also nice about them is that they can retrofit right onto your manual wheelchair if you've got quick release wheels. So the idea behind them, if you haven't seen them, they basically have shock absorbing elements in the design in the rear wheel itself. And so when you encounter an obstacle or you go down a curb or something, those elements deflect, and it allows your frame to kind of adjust and kind of soak up some of the vibrations that you feel. I think I might have a little bit of a video here. Not the best, but let's see if I can get it to play. Do this. So here's someone going off the curb in loop wheel. So this is one of two in-wheel suspension systems that I know of that came into commercialization. Soft wheels, I had intended to study, actually wrote it into the grant. I was going to do a comparative effectiveness kind of grant, and then soft wheels went out of business. So I was left with loop wheels, which is what you just saw there and on the previous slide. So it has a series of C-springs versus soft wheels was just a little bit different, had different kinds, slightly different element style in it, but concept's the same. So there's been a couple of studies done, all laboratory-based studies. One done by Dr. Spriegel and his group. Basically, they use their robotic wheelchair propulsion system to systematically look at how loop wheels and soft wheels compared to a standard configuration wheel. They looked at 4 surfaces and they didn't find any differences significantly in the vibration attenuation of soft wheels or loop wheels. In our study, which was the first phase of what I'm getting ready to talk about, we did a in-lab study as well. We looked at 9 surfaces and conditions. We had 24 experienced manual wheelchair users who used the loop wheels, and also we tested there's a standard quickie wheel, a spoked wheel, and a CLX Spinergy in the study. And we found that the loop wheels did reduce some whole body vibration at the wheelchair backrest and also at the footrest by 7 to 10%. We also asked people about their ride comfort when they went over these different obstacles, and we didn't find any differences there. All studies, again, controlled laboratory settings, limited surface types, limited amounts of exposure. So we thought, well, let's see what happens if we give a set of loop wheels to people, have them use them for 12 weeks in their own natural setting and over all the surfaces they're used to going over, and see how they do. And we looked at not just pain, and we were focusing mainly on pain at the neck, low back and upper back. We also were curious about fatigue because there's an association between if you're getting a lot of exposure to vibration, how's that, it can affect your fatigue levels, as well as participation. So I was kind of wondering, like, if people are able to do, or would want to do more things with this wheel, maybe go off curbs more frequently, things like that. So we also looked at some aspects of participation, and we put sensors on them for 2 weeks, or not quite 2 weeks, about 10 days in the field, about midway into this intervention, to look at how much vibration exposure were they actually getting when using the loop wheels. These are our inclusion-exclusion criteria. We did include only spinal cord injury in the study because the funding came from Craig Nielsen Foundation. I would have liked to have studied a little bit broader population, but this is what we did. Let's see, everything else is pretty straightforward there. They were full-time manual wheelchair users. These are some of the surveys that we had administered to examine the pain. So we did the International SCI Pain Data Set, the numerical rating scale for pain, fatigability index for spinal cord injury, and the environmental aspects of mobility questionnaire to get at the participation aspects. In terms of the experimental protocol, we did those baseline questionnaires with them. We fitted them with a pair of the loop wheels urban. They have 2 types based on how much you weigh. And so based on their weight, we either gave them the softer springs or what's called a regular spring. We also fitted the tire, or the wheels, with Marathon Plus tires, and with the PSI, we educated them on how important it was to maintain proper PSI throughout this intervention. And we also had 3 styles of ergonomic rims and the standard rim, and we asked them, what their desired preference was for using a push rim, and mounted that to the wheel. As I mentioned, midway, we fitted them with sensors, and at the end, we completed those baseline questionnaires again. So in terms of the data analysis, we looked at pre-post, those questionnaire scores for pain and so on. With the sensor data, we looked at a couple things with that. We looked at the distances that they traveled each day. We also looked at how much time they spent doing propulsion versus non-propulsion. We also looked at the vibration in terms of the root mean square and this vibrational dose value, which are kind of standard metrics that our field uses to look at and study vibration and shocks. And we also looked at those again for each day and averaged them over the days that we got the sensor data for. We had 26 people. We had 2 people that dropped from the study kind of early on. One dropped because they didn't like the weight of the wheels. Another one dropped because they were having some issues with the push rim they were using, was pinching their fingers. This is just some of the demographics of the user group. In terms of the health outcomes, what's in the table are the things that came out to be statistically significant. So we saw some reduction in the interference that pain had caused on them, baseline to post, and also the number of pain problems they reported went down. They reported slightly less fatigability. Again, if you look at those numbers, by the way, these are medians on the lower numbers are medians, the upper numbers are means and standard deviations. Little bit of change in fatigability, and the NRS neck pain score also went down. Didn't see any differences in lower or upper back pain, nor did we see any differences in the participation outcomes. In terms of their community activity and vibration, so these individuals on average spend about 2 hours a day doing propulsion. This is a little bit higher than what's been reported in other studies, which has been about 1 hour or so per day. And the distances they traveled were a little less than those other studies. So I think this might be a little bit due to possibly seasonal effects, which, we're in Pittsburgh, so we do have seasons, and also post-COVID effects. So I think this might be, I don't know, maybe others in the room may know more, but I think this could be one of the few studies that have been done post-COVID. I do think, more people are working at home, more people are ordering in takeout or other, sorts of things like that. So could be related to that, possibly. We saw propulsion, the root mean square values being higher during propulsion versus non-propulsion. That's probably no surprise there. The VDV values were a little bit lower for propulsion than non-propulsion, but that is a little bit due to the equation that's being used to calculate that, because propulsion, or the VDV, does not normalize to time, and you spend a lot more time, just sitting in your wheelchair than you do pushing it. So things will add up faster. So in terms of comparing this to, what, does this, what do these values mean, right? So there is an ISO standard that shows what the exposure levels would be and what would be considered to be high risk for a certain amount of time. So this gray region here, this is a button right there. Okay, that little block is about how much RMS or VDV you can be exposed to, and it would be hazardous for you if you were exposed to that for 4 to 8 hours of time. And then the broken lines and the dotted lines are basically how much RMS or VDV you could be exposed to in lesser amounts of time. So the higher the values, lesser amount of time there. And so for our data set here, people are, pushing around for 2 hours. So if you kind of extrapolate out the numbers, it kind of means that, okay, these would be your limits that would tell you, okay, if I have an RMS, I'm experiencing between 1 and 1.6, I'm at a pretty high risk for developing some potential injuries due to the vibration or shock. Okay, and so what we found in our study is, because again, the RMS was about 0.29. So this is outside of the hazardous zone, which is great, right? And so kind of highlights maybe a potential of effectiveness for using these kind of wheels for propulsion. But again, especially for the researchers in the room, they're probably like, hey, but don't have a control, right? So we don't really know what that looked like, when they were using their own, wheels before loop wheels. So what we can do is kind of look into the literature a little bit and kind of see, well, what have other people found for community level vibration exposure in a manual wheelchair using population. We actually did a study in our lab a few years ago, and it found that for over a 2-week period, they looked at these vibrations, found RMS to be about 0.8. So it was higher than what we found in our study by, we found about 35% less RMS in our study, and for the VDB, about 50% less. So Yeah, again, kind of good, but wheelchairs have changed, materials and wheelchairs have changed since then. So it's still not the best comparison, but it is, a promising, look on the data, I guess. And so our study shows that with the RMS values that we got for the community is that people would be able to propel 14 to 16 hours per day before they would be exposed to something that's harmful, right? So I kind of think it puts things into perspective a little bit because I think there was at a time a lot of emphasis on vibration being really harmful, but this kind of suggests that for the amount of time that people are actually pushing their chairs, that it may not be that harmful. And maybe it's the other things, right? Like how they're, static sitting posture or other things that might be contributing a little bit more to the neck and back pain. So what I'm not presenting is the qualitative feedback that we got from some of the individuals in the study. It was really mixed. I think we had a lot of people, we had half of them, really like the wheels. They like the way they look. They're very aesthetically pleasing. They like that it did provide a smoother ride, some good shock absorption for them. The negatives are the weight. The weight was coming up over and over again. They're not terribly that heavier than a standard wheel. Well, a little bit heavier than maybe like your Spinergy wheels would be, but that came up. I think that was issue for transfer of the wheelchair and so on. The increased propulsion cost is another big one. So what people would say is that, yeah, I like the shock absorption, but every time I push, I could feel like I was losing some energy, right? And especially when they were going like up a hill and things like that. And so Spriggle's group characterized propulsion costs on these really well. And they found that they basically take about 16% more effort to use than a standard wheel without suspension. So those are sort of the negatives. So there is a trade-off, right? So here are some couple clinical implications I think about these. I think they are a potential good option to consider to support individuals who are experiencing a lot of neck and back pain that's happening with propulsion or with going out into their environment, especially if they're really active outdoors. Um, but again, given the weight and propulsion cost, I also think it could be a very good option for those individuals who are using any kind of like power assist, like add-ons, because then the propulsion cost doesn't matter so much anymore, right? And you can get that smoother ride with these devices. So I just want to acknowledge the funding sources here, and that's it. So thank you very much.